as I say at the beginning of every program, welcome to Tell Me Your Story, New Paradigms for a New World. I'm Richard Dugan, your host. It's great to have you with us. Us? Who is us? Well, us is me, your cordial host, moderator, etc., servant of the universe, here with a very special guest, Angela Pearson. We're going to be talking about not only a very topical, we're going to have a very topical conversation, but we're going to broaden it as well. And we're going to talk about a children's book that she has produced, she's created, she's written, and some great illustrations in here as well. I Am Not Contagious. And I have to say that that phrase is probably one that I utter in my head anytime I go out these days, because I have received the J&J vaccination back in June of 2021, and I feel like, hey, I'm good to go. I can do just about anything, go anywhere, and so forth. But there are still folks who are concerned. But we're going to broaden that as well. We want to welcome you to our program, Angela. Thanks for being with us.
Thanks, Richard. Thanks so much for having me.
I'm just so glad you're there and I'm here because, I wouldn't want to catch anything from you.
That's right. Yeah. I think everyone's contagious these days, especially now more than ever.
in one way or the other, to be honest with you, you're right. Mm-hmm. You're absolutely right. In one fashion or another, every one of us has a contagion. Now, I would like to think my contagion is logical, thoughtful thinking and being around other people, and critical thinking that uses the facts, if you will. Mm-hmm. But also another aspect that normally when I start these programs, I go through a litany of pieces of information, and I get down to encouraging people to participate in the Decade of Perfect Vision, the 2020s, where we encourage people to go within, to trust that still small voice, to be in that quiet, peaceful place, to sort of relax, rejuvenate, etc., etc. Mm-hmm. And I'd like to think that those are the kinds of things I would like to, I'm going to use the term since we're talking about it in this context, to infect people with, is with a more conscious and aware, not the kind of aware or awoke that people are talking about that's even getting criticized these days, but more where it's like, wait a minute, we're all human beings. There are all kinds of things going on around the planet. I sometimes wonder if maybe when I was a kid growing up with legal blindness, kids maybe they thought, oh, no, we got to stay away from him. We're going to harass him because he's contagious. We might catch the blindness from him. I know there are some people who think cancer is contagious, they say laughter is contagious. Sometimes there are those, depending upon who you're with, crying is, please don't start crying, because then if you start crying, I'll start crying. And,
right. Right. No, you're absolutely right.
How did you come up with this concept? And I know this is primarily dealing with people who are really concerned about the whole vaccination thing. And we'll dive into that too, but I do want to broaden it because, as you said, we're all contagious in one form or another with something. Hopefully it's some of the better things in life and humanity. But how did this idea come to you?
Well, back in 2019, I live in New York. So in 2019, Governor Andrew Cuomo removed religious exemption. Now, for those who don't understand what religious exemption is, religious exemption was a way that my children were allowed to go to school because philosophical beliefs just was non-existent here in New York. And New York was the fifth state to remove religious exemption, which was a loophole for children who do not receive their childhood vaccinations to go to school. So if it wasn't religious exemption, they would use a medical exemption. My children did not qualify for a medical exemption, even though my oldest son, which his adverse reaction to a vaccine is what led me down the journey of my holistic path. And he had an adverse reaction, but even though he had an adverse reaction, that didn't qualify me, unfortunately, to get a medical exemption for him, my daughter, or my youngest son. So the loophole was to use a religious exemption. So once that was removed, my son was given 14 days after the first day of school started in 2019 to say goodbye to his friends. My daughter, however, was going to college that same year. So the rules and the law did not apply to her because the laws did not apply to colleges. So she was still able to go to college on religious exemption. But anyone who was going to preschool, kindergarten, K through 12, were no longer allowed to attend school without being vaccinated or unless they had a medical exemption. So my son had so many questions. And even though he knew that he wasn't going to be allowed to finish the first grade, he's been going to school his entire life. He went to toddler school. He went to preschool. He went to kindergarten. And even though he knew he wouldn't be able to complete the first grade, because I did warn him, he still wanted to go to the first grade. So he did. And he was only allowed to go for 14 days. Unless he received his vaccinations or the start of his vaccinations. But afterwards, you know, he had so many questions. I left my job, I left my career because I felt like my back was up against the wall, didn't have any other alternative. And I wasn't going to go against everything that I believe in. And what I felt is the safety of my children. And as my children's mother, it is my job, it is my duty and my obligation to protect my children at whatever cost that is. And if that means throwing my career away so that I can do what's best for my children, that's exactly what I did. Mm-hmm. And I don't regret it. But he had so many questions. And I was going to get involved in real estate. And I went to a 3-day boot camp out in Miami. And when I went there, in my head, I'm thinking, okay, I just left my career. Yes, I have a 401k. Yes, I have some savings. I have some money stashed away. But in the back of my mind, I know that you can't live without money. We can't eat without money. I'm fortunate that I have my son's father that I can lean on in that regard, because we're together, we live under the same roof. So I am one of the fortunate ones. There was 26,000 families who were affected by this. And unfortunately, there are some single parents out there who didn't have that same support as me. And perhaps they had to leave New York, or maybe they felt like they didn't have any other alternative but to get them vaccinated. But for me, I didn't have to do that. And I just knew that I needed another way to make money. So when I went down to Florida to this real estate event, on my way home, on the plane ride home, I had like this epiphany. And it was just like, something just hit me. And it was unsettling knowing that I went down there for the wrong reason. Growing up when I was a child, I was bullied. And I felt like I didn't have a voice. And my dad was old-fashioned and kids were seen and not heard. So I felt like my voice never mattered. And for me, it was always like, when I became a mother, we take things from our parents and we either do things like them or we're going to do the complete opposite of how they raised us, right? Because we want to break that cycle. Mm-hmm. And for me, that was one of the things that I wanted to break. I always promised that when I have children, I'm going to make sure that they have a voice, and that that regardless of how small they are, their voices matter. And I'm always going to validate their feelings. I think validating their feelings is a very critical component to how they behave, and from a psychological standpoint, it's quite beneficial when we validate our children's feelings. Mm-hmm. For positive self-perception. So on this plane ride home, this epiphany that hit me was just like, you're doing this all wrong. This is not what you're supposed to be doing. Your son needs you, and you need to write a book. You need to share his story.
Mm.
And I know I'm not going to make, tons of money from this. This is not why I'm doing this. I'm doing this because this was, and like, here's the thing, I don't put my perspective in this story at all, because as adults, we tend to get on a scientific level, right?
Mhm.
And when we do that, it's okay for adults to do that. But I think that when we do that, we kind of miss the point, and we want to step over the other person, and we always want to be right. The other person needs to be right. The other person needs to be right. And then there's this whole like combative argument in which we create amongst each other. And there's never going to be any unity because someone always has to be right.
Yeah.
But with my child, this is from his perspective. He doesn't understand the scientific side of things just yet, but he does understand that he can't go to school with his friends. He does know that he's not sick, and he's not going to give you something that he doesn't have. And bullying comes in all forms.
Mm-hmm.
And society bullies, the government is bullying, and this is what we call tyranny.
Mm-hmm.
And this is medical tyranny. And if we're going to stand for the Constitution, you can't stand for just part of the Constitution and not all of it. It's either all or none.
Mm-hmm.
And what you might think is best for you and your family, I might not think that's what's best for me and my family. And that's the whole beauty about living here in the United States, is that we have the right to do what is best for ourselves and our families. And this is why I believe in informed consent, and I think that informed consent, and I would encourage parents to read the ingredients and evaluate their medical history before performing any type of medical procedure. And I think that's what a lot of people don't understand, is that when you vaccinate, it is a medical procedure. And my oldest son had an adverse reaction, which caused him to be in the hospital for 3 days. That is scary for a mother. He was severely dehydrated because he had diarrhea, he was vomiting, and he had a fever. And as a mother, I was scared to even give him any more vaccinations. I just felt like if this was going to put him in the hospital for 3 days, and if I continued his vaccine schedule provided by the CDC, what's going to happen to him later on? Like, is he going to survive his next routines,
Yeah.
vaccinations? And then I think about my other children. If I put them through this, what's going to happen to them?
Mm-hmm.
So I think the story, like I said, and that's why it's important, because I don't get into this in the children's book.
Right.
This is from the perspective of an innocent 6-year-old little boy who just doesn't understand why he can't go to school and be with his friends.
Yeah.
And through the book, he gives like these little life lessons on how and why it's important that we basically flip on the light, right, inside of our heads, so that we can put ourselves in each other's shoes, and try to have compassion for one another, especially on issues that aren't fully understood, or perhaps there's the narrative that's being spent, that's being spent on the mainstream media.
Mm-hmm.
They're not being fair
Right.
to the public by only putting one side of science out there, when I think all science needs to be put on the table.
We're talking with Angela Pearson. She has a book out, a children's book called I Am Not Contagious. We're going to continue this conversation here on Tell Me Your Story, New Paradigms for a New World, giving you choices and knowledge of those choices to help make your dreams come true. And we are talking with her about this very important issue, because we're living in a country now, specifically this country right now, where we have some real interesting, I'm going to say diametrically opposed views on many, many subjects. This is just one of them. And we want to continue talking with her about that here on Tell Me Your Story. We are giving you choices and knowledge of those choices to help make your dreams come true. And we hope that you will stay with us throughout this very special edition of Tell Me Your Story, New Paradigms for a New World. We are here Sundays at 7 a.m. and 7 p.m., Monday mornings at 1 a.m., and of course, the 9 a.m. Wednesday special edition of Tell Me Your Story. We're here with Angela Pearson with the book, I Am Not Contagious. I want to address one area that I've kind of brought up. And I'm not necessarily taking sides here. Bear in mind, that's not my intent here. But I wanted to put this out there. And again, I want to show as much respect for you and your philosophy, your decisions, your family's health and welfare. But I want to put this question to you. You talk about the Constitution. It's all of it or none of it. There is in the preamble, that says, we the people, in order to form a more perfect union, establish justice, ensure domestic tranquility, promote the general welfare, and secure the blessings of liberty to ourselves and to our posterity. And I've asked this question of many people. How do you balance that, so to speak, against the very staunch positions of individual, I have the First Amendment constitutional right to do whatever I want, wherever I want, whenever I want, however I want, damn the torpedoes and to heck with civilization because my rights are more important. Now, you aren't saying that. Don't get me wrong. I'm not hearing that from you. You are talking about your little community, i.e. your family, promoting the general welfare and securing the blessings for your posterity, your children. Can you talk a little bit about what I perceive, and when I put the question out, as a dichotomy, as almost mutually exclusive concepts, because it's like it's either individual rights or community, promoting the general welfare?
So I think there's like a misconception. I think that when people read into the Constitution, there's going to be a small group of people who misconstrued what freedom is. Understand? Okay.
Mm-hmm.
So I think that, and then when you have another group of people who think that those who don't vaccinate, who call us selfish, right?
Mm-hmm.
So someone who is pro-vaccine and all about vaccination, and especially considering what's happening with the world in regards to COVID, I've heard a lot of people come out and say that everyone needs to be forced to be vaccinated against the COVID virus. I think that, and then we're labeled selfish if we don't. So again, you're going to have the extremist on both sides where they misconstrue what freedom actually means. Okay, it doesn't mean you get to go and just basically just do what you want and burn things and create riots and do whatever else. And I'm free and look at me, I'm the king of the jungle, if you will.
Yeah, exactly.
Okay. And another misconception is where you have people who think that if we don't vaccinate, we're selfish, and that we owe it to the community to sacrifice ourselves and sacrifice our children for the greater good to save humanity. Okay. Mm-hmm. This becomes an issue for me because as a mother, I was given children from God. I was blessed with 3 children. And it is my obligation and my duty to protect my children. Now, that doesn't mean I'm going to purposefully infect them with something and then send them out into the public for them to infect someone else. But I think that a lot of people are not being educated on, even when children are being vaccinated with a live virus, such as the MMR vaccine or the DTaP vaccine or even the flu vaccine. This is a virus that was weakened with formaldehyde, and then it's being injected into our children or injected into the population, and then they're being sent to school, and then they're the ones who are infecting other children, okay, because of shedding. So
Because
this
of what now?
isn't this
I'm sorry. Because of what?
shedding,
Oh, okay.
or
Okay.
viral shedding.
Okay.
And if you've ever been to a hospital in the ICU, and if you've ever been at an elderly home, or on the cancer floor at the hospital, there's a little sign there that tells you that if, it kind of flags you and stops you and it says, hey, by the way, if you have been inoculated with a live virus, such as the MMR vaccine, DTaP, or flu vaccine, you cannot enter. You cannot enter. You cannot see anyone. You cannot visit anyone in the ICU. You cannot visit anyone on the cancer floor, and you can't visit anyone that is in a senior home, because their immune systems are so weakened. Okay, they're compromised because either they're elderly, or because they are taking chemo treatments, or for whatever the reason is. So if they're acknowledging that much, why are they sending these kids to a public school when they have this information, when they know that viral shedding can occur?
Mm-hmm.
And then you look at the school in Texas back in 2019, I believe. There was a school in Houston, Texas. The children were 100% vaccinated. There were no children that went to that school that were not vaccinated.
Mm-hmm.
And there was a pertussis outbreak. They had to shut down the school. You can't blame that on the unvaccinated community. This occurred amongst those who were fully vaccinated because of viral shedding. So when they look at children who are not vaccinated and they point fingers and they say, you're contagious, when in reality, children who are being vaccinated with the live virus, they're the ones who are contagious. So I think that if parents are going to, take the route and vaccinate their children, because I'm about informed consent. I'm not going to condemn you if you feel that is what's best for you and your family. But I do think that you need to be informed. And there's a difference in being informed and then having the doctor tell you that they're safe and effective. Having a doctor tell you that they're safe and effective, I'm sorry to tell you, but that's not being informed.
Mm-hmm.
Okay, being informed is really understanding what the ingredients are. And if you don't know what something is, like MRC-5
Right.
or WI-38, if
Mm-hmm.
you don't know what those are, I mean, you can certainly look them up.
Yeah.
You can Google them.
Yeah.
And yeah.
And you mentioned formaldehyde. And what's interesting is that, and most people do not know this, and I did several interviews back in 1983. I've been doing this for over 40 years, interviewing people. And I was interviewing supposedly a nutritional expert on the pros and cons of what was then called Equal, the sweetener that's known chemically as aspartame. And most people do not know this. And I did some checking into this, as well as talking with a mortician, a funeral home director. And I asked him, I said, so what's changed in the last 5-10 years in your industry? He says, well, the biggest change is that we're using less formaldehyde than we've ever used before, which is very, very strange. Well, then I did some further checking and talking with people in the health industry, the scientific community. Turns out aspartame, i.e. Equal, turns into formaldehyde in the human body. So people who drink diet sodas with aspartame are basically embalming themselves as they live. And I found that rather interesting. We're going to continue this conversation. There's so much more to talk about, certainly, and we're just trying to put the information out there. I'm a firm believer, Angela, in what was once called the Fairness Doctrine. It was abolished in 1981 by the president at that time, which said it is important, you need to cover all sides of a particular issue in a conversation. When that was abolished, I believe that's when the echo chambers began to spring up, and I find those appalling. I do not want to be an echo chamber. Do I always agree with my guests? No, not always. I don't always disagree with them either. The whole point is to, just like what you were talking about, have some information. That's what we talk about here on the program, Angela, choices and knowledge of those choices to help make your dreams come true. And if you don't know what choices you have, then you need to get educated. And we're hopefully doing that here with your book and the conversation we're having. Angela Pearson is my guest. AngelaPearson.com is a website. We will be linked to her website as well. And you are listening to Tell Me Your Story, New Paradigms for a New World. We have podcasts on SoundCloud, iTunes, TuneIn Radio, Stitcher, Spotify, Player FM, iHeartRadio, Amazon Music, and many other locations, too numerous to mention. So we hope that you will check those out. We're also on YouTube, where you can watch these videos and you can find out more. And as I said before, we will be linked to Angela's website, angelapearson.com, as we continue here on Tell Me Your Story. And we are talking with Angela Pearson, and we are talking about a very serious, I'm going to say, Angela, that it's not so much a serious topic as far as exclusively this issue of vaccinations. And I don't say that to minimize it, but it raises a bigger issue that we have in this country in particular, the dilemma of who and or what to believe. There's a wonderful joke that I love telling. It's a very brief one about the internet. And it basically goes like this, Angela. Just remember what Abraham Lincoln said. Don't trust anything you read on the internet.
Mm-hmm.
Now, there are some people who actually believe that that's a real quote. There was no internet in Lincoln's day.
Mm-hmm.
Our problem right now is, who do we believe? What do we believe? Where are we getting our information? And the only thing I can think of to describe the real accuracy of information is what they refer to as primary source information. But again, how do you know it's primary source? So here's that issue. You talk about having informed consent, but how can you be sure? You talk about, we'll say, two sides of science.
Mm-hmm.
But where are people getting their information from? Because we've heard in the last 5 or 6 years all kinds of unbelievable statements and comments about what to do about this virus, or what to do about this issue, this problem, that problem, from all kinds of quarters that we used to be able to trust. I mean, we just sort of, I guess, implicitly did. I was born in 1960. I've had those, I think the chickenpox and measles vaccines and several of the others. And I don't know how different they were then from what they are today. Apparently they must be different because technology continues to carry on. But how do you address the issue of the accuracy, the validity of the information that you're getting to make what you refer to as an informed decision? I think that's an extremely important issue that we need to talk about.
I think that I would advise everyone, the first place that they can look is they can go to the CDC website and look at the vaccine ingredients. They can also go to their pediatrician and request for a vaccine insert. The vaccine insert will then have all the vaccine ingredients. It will also have all the, they call them side effects. We call them direct effects, because they're direct effects that are being caused by certain ingredients that are being put into these vaccines. I would start there because they have to tell you what's in them. But my other advice is when you get to certain things like MR-C5 or WI-38, when we get to those things that we don't quite understand, like, okay, well, those are just numbers and letters. I don't know what that represents. So then we skim over it and then we just keep going. Or they get to a word that they can't really pronounce and then they're like, they just skip over it. You know, I think as a society, we've become accustomed, and it's partly, it's how we're brought up today, right? With TV, with the internet, like you said, with the mainstream media. This is all put in front of us to distract us. Also, I think by having Google, it's making a lot of us lazy, where we don't really want to put in the work to actually do the research.
Mm-hmm.
Or we go to YouTube and we try to find someone who's giving out this information, but they're not backing their information up with proof.
Mm-hmm.
So then we just kind of say, oh, this must be true because this person is saying it. We have to stop relying on that type of information and those sources. And we have to go straight to the source. And
but you have to acknowledge too that there are those who don't trust any government organization, agency like the CDC or WHO, the World Health Organization, et cetera, that there's a myriad of conspiracy theories out there. I'm sure you're familiar with many of them, including those who will accuse people such as yourself. And I'm not going to use the term that they like to use, because you have made a decision to do your utmost as mother to keep your cubs, if you will, stay away from mama bear if the cubs are around, to keep your cubs healthy and well, because you've done this research. But there are people who say, I don't trust the CDC. I don't trust the government. I don't trust this because there's a conspiracy to do this, that, and the other thing. And it's like, again, now we're back to that same old position of, where are you getting your information?
But if they're so concerned, if they're making those types of comments, then why are they just trusting their doctor and getting inoculated? You have to, like I said, if you don't want to go online, if you don't want to go to the CDC website, go get a vaccine insert. Start there. Get a vaccine insert, because by law, legally, they have to put the ingredients in there, because they have to inform you.
Yeah, and also get a microscope too, because usually it's printed in very tiny.
Very, very tiny. Absolutely. It's very tiny.
And by the way, I was, yes, exactly. And it's a long thing. It's worse than a CVS receipt, let me tell you. You know how long those can get. We're talking with Angela Pearson, and we're talking about her book and the work that she's doing through the book, I Am Not Contagious. By the way, who did the illustrations in the book? I really like them.
Yeah, thank you. I actually made like this description for each page that I wanted. It was very important for me, but I actually hired someone out of India who really helped me bring my vision to life. Which I actually wrote this book pre-COVID, okay?
Yeah,
and then COVID hit, and then India was one of the countries that got hit really hard, and everything was shut down. So we lost contact with him for a little bit. And we actually had to finish the illustrations a little bit without him, because we just kind of lost contact with him. But he's okay. He's okay.
That's good.
Yeah, I hired someone out of India. He brought my visions to life, and I couldn't be happier.
We're talking with Angela Pearson. This is Tell Me Your Story. I'm Richard Dugan, your host, and I thank you for staying with us. And just a reminder that if you'd like to support the work that we are doing here on Tell Me Your Story, if what we're talking about and the subjects on all of the programs, whether you're listening to the broadcast or the podcast or the video cast, resonate with you, we would love to have your support financially. That's why we have a PayPal and Patreon account. It's for your security as well as ours. And then, of course, as we also like to tell you, please spending time during this decade of perfect vision, going within and listening to that still small voice. It sounds an awful lot like Angela's done that. And we're going to continue to talk with Angela and listen to her voice as we continue this conversation about I Am Not Contagious here on Tell Me Your Story, New Paradigms for a New World. I'm Richard Dugan, your host, and we are talking about new ways of living, looking for those new ways of living. The old ways obviously don't work. All you have to do is look around you. There's a lot of chaos, Angela, that seems to be going on, not just in this country, but even around the world. Some people are actually saying that's a good thing, because that's going to bring about the kinds of changes that we really need. There was a woman that I had on my program several times. She was a visionary, futurist, even a vice presidential candidate back in, I think it was the 60s, early 70s, Barbara Marx Hubbard, who talked about the process that we are going through. And this was back in 2007 when she said this to me. The process that we are going through, even today in 2021, is kind of like the birth pangs. Now, you as a mother know what those are like. All right. And if you didn't have to go through those, boy, wouldn't that be nice? But that's not the way it's done, unfortunately, unless, of course, I guess, what is it, an epidural? Give me the drugs, But when it's all said and done, then you're holding this incredible, wonderful new being that you get to help. You've brought it into this world, and now you get to watch it grow, and you get to help it to develop and mature and all of those things. I hate to use this word, but it's kind of appropriate. You help it to evolve into someone that will be someone who will make a difference in this world for the better for everyone. And that's kind of the way she put it. And so there were people who were moaning and groaning and complaining all through 2020 because of the pandemic, because of the shutdown and this and that and the other. And then the vaccines came available and the list of complaints went on and on and on. And I have to tell you, Angela, when the country was shut down, I was thrilled. Not because, oh, great, because then we'll put this, get rid of this thing. Yeah, I kind of hoped that if we had done what we were asked to do in the first place, we might have been through this in July of 2020. It would have been over. We would have shut down. And I'm not saying that would have happened. I'm just speculating. But what I saw were incredible opportunities we didn't even know existed that were going to be created because of this new way of living for hopefully a short period of time. And yeah, it went on for 16, 17, maybe 18 months. But there are a lot of people who flourished. I know there were a lot of people who were hurt by it. So over 600,000 people died. We won't even get into the numbers and comparisons and so forth. All I'm saying is that there are so many different perspectives to what went on over the last year and a half. And go ahead. I'll let you.
Sorry. I just want to, first I want to say, anyone who lost their life to COVID, have my deepest, condolences and everything else. I think that first and foremost, I just want to put that out there because I think one is one too many lives lost.
Yes.
Regardless of the situation with COVID, cancer, the flu, anything, and not to compare and take away from anyone because a life is a life. And I believe that. I am pro-life. And that's another reason why I don't vaccinate. So, I mean, my sympathy, my condolences to any families or, to anyone who lost someone to COVID. I just want to dive in just a little bit.
Sure.
When we look at the death rate in 2018 for the US, the death rate was 2,839,205. Then we go to 2019, the death rate was 2,854,838. Okay, so our population rate went up, but the death rate was higher. Then we go to 2020, okay, and this is when the death rate went up higher. We lost 3,358,814 people here in just America, okay? So when we take that number, we lost 503,976 people in 2020. Now, I think there's this misconception that we're taking this 503,976 people, 503,976 people, we're taking that number and we're connecting that with COVID. We did not lose 503,976 people to COVID. We actually lost 375,000 people to COVID.
Now, when you say that, you are saying specifically that it was the virus and not underlying conditions that were exacerbated by the virus that caused these people's perishing.
That's a good question. So out of those 375,000 people that we lost to COVID, there are some that had underlying conditions.
Now, one of the things that, and you're still with me here, one of the things that I find interesting, excuse me, about that is, number one, and you said it so well just a few moments ago, that these were human beings. And I'm not a fan of statistics because it dehumanizes these people.
Right.
It's just awful. That happens. We've lost fewer people, more people to the flu than we did to
Exactly.
COVID, and on and on and on. And it's
And I
like,
know, and I hate those
oh,
comparisons because
yeah,
I don't like that either. Because it does. I feel like we're dehumanizing the people that lost their lives, regardless of the situation. And that's why I needed to put that out there,
and
because
I'm glad you did.
my heart is in the right place. And
Yes.
this is my point, is that when we talk about science and we talk about things that are happening, all the science is not being presented properly. And this is when misinformation starts to happen, because we think that maybe we lost 500,000 people or 600,000 people, and we might state that, but then we have to dive into the numbers a little bit. Yes, we did lose 503,000, almost 504,000 people,
Mm-hmm.
but out of those, we lost 375 to COVID who had some underlying issues as well. And I have the numbers, I just printed them off and stuff like that. I can dive into the ages and the sexes and the
Sure.
nationalities and everything if you want me to.
No, that's okay. I was just going to say, there was a study that was done back in, I think it was July, it was maybe August of 2020, in New York City specifically. And they did a real quick a study of the percentage of those people, similar to what you just shared with us, instead of the 600,000 that they've been telling us, to the 300,000 that you say probably died primarily from the virus itself. They did a quick study of how many of the people who died from the virus versus died from those underlying conditions that the virus took advantage of. It turns out that study showed 99% died from underlying conditions. Now, here's an interesting perspective that I want to put out to you. The studies that we have been hearing about the health of our nation, of its people, the level of obesity amongst the population is so high that if people had been taking care of themselves in such a way as not to have those underlying conditions, they might actually have survived. No guarantees. I'm just saying that the possibilities are that if their immune systems were strong. Now, by the way, you talked about the flu, in the flu vaccine. I have not had the flu vaccine in probably 40 years.
Mm-hmm.
Have I gotten sick? I can't remember the last time I had the flu. I tell the story of when I was sick in bed at home with my family when I was a kid. I was laying there moaning and groaning, and my mother and sister came in, and my sister says, "Would you please make him stop moaning? He sounds terrible." She says, "No, that's how he heals himself." A little more alternative medicine, if you will. But that's kind of my perspective, and I'll share one final thing with you, and I love your input. July 23rd, 2020. That evening, I drank 2 bottles of what we refer here in California as Mexican Coke, Coca-Cola, which has sugar, not glucose or not glucose. Anyway, a substitute for cane sugar. Didn't, no big deal. And sodas have been my Achilles heel. I was going to say, I don't know if it's Achilles heel or Achilles tendon. Anyway, hey, look, I didn't go to medical school, so I don't. But I went into the doctor on the 24th of July, having these symptoms, drinking lots of water and peeing a lot. My wife, of course, knew exactly what that was. I was diagnosed on the 24th of July with type 2 diabetes.
Mm-hmm.
My blood sugar that day, 544. A1C, 11.2. I was in shock for maybe 30 minutes. Then the doc is telling me, Richard, this is going to be a long journey. I said, no, it's not. He says, I know how I got here. Because my blood sugar before that exam, was normal in the hundreds, low hundreds, A1C 5.7. So I said, no, it's not. I know how I got here. And it was the pandemic. Because what did most people go to during the pandemic as far as foods? Comfort foods, sugars, carbs, and not exercising much. By the middle of September, I had my blood sugar down in the low hundreds. I have not had a soda in over a year. I've substituted it with the flavored sparkling waters. There's one
Mhm.
called Cascade Ice is one of them. 0 calories, zero sugar, zero carbs. And my doctor says, and these are his words, not mine, and you don't hear this from the medical community, Angela. That's miraculous. And I'm not taking the meds anymore. Matter of fact, when he told me to take 2 of the metformin, for about a month, I took 2. Then I dropped down to 1 to see what would happen, and my blood sugar still kept going down. Then when
Mhm.
he told me I could take 0, then when he told me I could take just 1, I stopped taking them altogether. I never told him that. And he is just amazed. He is stunned. He is astounded that my health is what it is. From your perspective as a mom, not just for your children, but for yourself and your health, how much of what you do is informed versus, maybe not versus, but intuitive? There's the mother's intuition, I guess you call it, right?
Mhm.
That just the instinct that you have as a mom to know what is best for your children, setting aside all of that information that you gather, whether it's from the CDC or wherever else. Can you talk to us a little bit about that?
Sure. So I grew up poor, and my father was legally blind as well. And, he collected a disability check, but he also worked. And he would walk 10 miles to work, 10 miles home every single day. And he would walk to the grocery store and get what he could to provide for us, what he could afford.
Mm-hmm.
And there were times where we heated our house with the kerosene heater, and we had to heat our bath water with a kerosene heater. We would put the pots of water on a kerosene heater, and there was 5 of us. I had 2 older sisters and 2 younger brothers, and none of us wanted to be the last one in the bathtub. Um, but we grew up with canned foods.
Yeah.
Those perishable items,
Yeah.
and we ate boxed mashed potatoes. We didn't eat anything real. And I think with that, I mean, you have like all the sodium. There's no nutritional values in canned foods and boxed foods and things like that, right?
Mm-hmm. Right.
So with that, and the fact that my oldest son had a vaccine adverse reaction, it really, like, I went science geek on everything, and I research ingredients in foods. I research them, in vaccines as well. What's fascinating to me that the way they're trying to entice people to get this injection
Mm-hmm.
and to be a part of this experiment, because it's still an experimental injection, even though it's not been approved by the FDA, and I don't trust the FDA as far as you can throw them. But they're enticing people and young people to get this, and they're going to give them a donut, or they're going to give them something else. And
Mm-hmm.
like you mentioned, a lot of what's happening with our health and well-being, it's coming from the foods that we put into our body. But it's not just the foods that we're putting into our body, it's the ingredients. So we have to listen. We have to learn how to take charge
Mm-hmm.
for ourselves and for our families, and start researching the chemicals into foods too. And the thing is, like, food is expensive, right? The good food is
Oh,
expensive.
yeah.
Healthy food is expensive. If you're going to get organic produce versus produce that's not been sprayed with pesticides and herbicides, there's going to be significant in the prices, and you're going to see that. What I do for me and my family, every food that I purchase, I look at it as a health investment. I am investing in my health. I am investing in my children's health because I want to create longevity. Now, systemic lupus runs in my family. My father passed away in 2008 with systemic lupus, and my older son also has systemic lupus. I know that it runs in my family. I see it. My sister has it as well. That's an indication that I need to take better care of myself. I need to take better care of my family. And what foods do I need to avoid? So I avoid red meat. I avoid pork. I avoid the white poisons, and the white poisons are your white sugars, your white flours, right? Anything bleached, stay away from it. Stay away from artificial sweeteners. Like you spoke about aspartame earlier. They did a study in lab rats, and lab rats got cancer from aspartame. But we're giving these to obese individuals, and we're telling them that diet soda is okay for you because it has zero sugar. So be leery of anything that says zero sugars. Usually it has some sort of artificial sweetener in it. High fructose corn syrup, stay away from high fructose corn syrup. So artificial sweeteners, artificial flavors, and colors, dyes, right? Dyes are not bad, but once you intake them, ingest them, and it goes into the liver, the way that it changes, right? The molecules, everything about it is just bad. So what I do is I look at things, stay away from dyes, artificial sweeteners, artificial flavors, high fructose corn syrup, white bleach, anything that's been bleached. And I try to get, or I don't try to get, I mean, I get organic produce. There's definitely something that I think people, if they say that they can't afford organic foods, I'm sure that they're doing something that they could give up, whether that be smoking. Okay. I see a lot of people who are smoking cigarettes, and then they tell me that they can't afford this or they can't afford that. Well, you have developed an extremely a nasty addiction, and you have to try to, stop it. I used to smoke cigarettes, and I think I'm most passionate about the things that I've gone through in life, where I used to smoke cigarettes from I was 13 to 21, I was smoking cigarettes. And I gave that bad habit up many, many years ago because I'm now in my 40s. And I vaccinated. My son had an adverse reaction. So we went through something like that. So I'm extremely passionate about that. And then the food situation. So I'm extremely passionate about that. So I think just like with vaccines, we have to inform ourselves about what's in our food. And this is all about the money. This is not about our health. If the government and pharmaceutical companies cared about our health, they would try to do everything that they can to make us healthy.
Yeah.
But doctors don't get paid unless their patients are sick. Pharmaceutical companies will most certainly go broke if they're not dishing out these pharmaceutical drugs and trying to entice people like, this is what you need, but then it creates this side effect. But then you got to take this for that side effect. And then you got to take this other prescription drug for that. So taking a probiotic daily is extremely important.
Yeah.
So
well,
I would.
Yeah. And I will tell you, I had a good friend back in Phoenix when I was working there in 95. She was probably in her 60s, and she was taking 9 different medications. And it was the cycle that you just described. I says, you need to go to your physician, and you need to talk to your physician about these 9 medications and find out if you really need any of them, or which ones you really need. And she did that, and she actually came off of, I think, 5 or 6 or 7 of them. The other aspect too is, I find this very fascinating. I've talked with many people in regards to health and wellness on this program. I said, look, okay, if I cut my hand, all right, within a few weeks, that's going to heal up, and it will look as if nothing ever happened. All right, cell regeneration, if you will. I have glaucoma in my left eye. I have no vision in my left eye. My left eye looks different than my right eye. Okay. Why is my eye not regenerating healthy cells, and maybe getting that vision back that I had, which was only 2,400? I'm not clear on that. And then I remember hearing, I'm sure you heard this too, that, drinking alcohol kills brain cells, and you're reducing the size of your brain, and that kind of thing. And then I find out not long ago, that is not true. That does not mean you can go out and just imbibe like crazy. But the reality is that our bodies are regenerated every 7 years. You are not the person that you were 7 years ago, nor am I. And we regenerate the trillions of cells every 7 years. And of course, the kicker is what you just talked about. what are we putting in our bodies during that 7-year period that is going to make us healthier? I mean, I did this in less than a month and a half of getting rid of type 2 diabetes, primarily because I knew how I had gotten there. I have high blood pressure. My mother, you talked about systemic lupus in your family. My mother told me, oh, yeah, high blood pressure, it runs in the family. And I'm
Hmm.
sitting here going, well, it may run in the family, but why does it have to stay?
Right, exactly. You don't have to be okay with it, and that's why we take measures into
Yeah.
preventing it. So a lot of times people just think that like cancer runs in my family, right? So that's why I was like, wait, if cancer runs in my family, lung cancer, stomach cancer, pancreatic cancer, that all runs in my family, but everybody in my family smokes cigarettes, then I need to stop smoking cigarettes. So it's about stopping whatever it is that everybody else is doing in your family so that you break those cycles. And when we look at autoimmune diseases, we have about 330 million people in the United States of America. Okay, that is the population today. There's 50 million people who are suffering from autoimmune diseases. Okay, and we already know that heart disease is the number one killer, and then cancer is number two. And this past year, COVID was ranked number three. So when we look at all of this, why is cancer on the rise? Why is it attacking our young children who haven't even been here for 5 years yet?
Mm-hmm.
We're seeing children who are 5, 6 years old. My sister had cancer. She got it when she was 6 years. My stepsister had it when she was 6, and she passed away at 11. So you talk about, these situations. Why is this happening? What needs to happen is, out of all of those people who have autoimmune diseases, out of those children who are suffering with cancer today, why aren't we doing studies on how many of them have been inoculated with childhood vaccines? Okay, because I think that the combination between childhood vaccinations, the ingredients that they're putting into these vaccines, and the ingredients that they're putting into our foods are the two sources that is causing us to be infected with cancers and autoimmune diseases, and it's what's killing us today. And we need to stand up, and we need to say enough is enough, and we need to start growing our own food, because you have a lot of people, a lot of billionaires who are starting to step in, and they're going to take over the food source. They're already spraying everything with pesticides, and they're putting all of the, and I guarantee you that these people, you're the richest people in the world, I promise you, they're not eating these same foods. I promise you.
Yeah, they
And
know, because they know.
mhm.
And that's the one interesting thing that is really, again, this kind of goes back to what we talked about earlier in terms of information, in terms of the sources where we go. You talk about the internet, and I'm thinking, when was the last time you were actually physically, and setting aside the whole pandemic and being locked down, physically in a library? Does anybody know what a library is?
Yeah.
I love the smell of a library. I mean, I remember going to the library in high school, which, by the way, I actually got thrown out of. I've only been thrown out of one. That was the one.
Were you too loud?
A little bit. Can you understand why? I'm sure you can understand that I was a little loud. But I love going through certain books, the bookstores, and self-help is always a big deal. Spiritual, the section on spirituality and that kind of thing. Metaphysics are a couple of my favorite subjects dealing with this kind of thing. I want to ask you in that regard, how has this? And you talked about your upbringing, especially, but in terms of the philosophy that you were raised with, and that which you live by today, and you can replace the word with religion if you'd like. How has that changed for you from then to now? How have you, again, sorry for using this word, how have you evolved spiritually in your walk and your life, especially now that you're a mother, and you're concerned about this stuff on the material level in this real material world?
Yeah, I think, like I said, growing up poor and growing up on the types of foods that we had, um, and now, um, teaching, so let's just start with faith, okay? So I grew up in a church, and I grew up in a Pentecostal church. And, when we moved to North Carolina, things just kind of changed. So I have been inconsistent with my faith. But as I got older, I knew that there were some things that I wanted to take away that I learned from my parents, and there were obviously a lot of things that I didn't want to bring over into the way I parented my children. And health was a really, really big part of that. Okay, love and affection and food and just being healthy. And I used to think that, food and the health and whatever was the most important thing, until just a few months ago, because of my inconsistency with my faith, my relationship with God has just kind of been up and down. And I've developed a newfound relationship with God. And I know now that had I been consistent with my faith first, that everything else is going to fall into place just as it should. And so that is number one. That is the most important thing for me now moving forward as a mother, and even teaching my children that too. And I've even apologized to my oldest son because I was inconsistent with my faith. And we get this question a lot, like, what is your biggest regret? Oh, whatever. And, before it would be like, oh, I should have done this. Maybe it had something to do with finances or whatever. But it all goes back to my inconsistency with my faith. You know what I mean? Had I been consistent with my faith, everything would have fallen into place just as it should. So I explained that to my oldest son, and in hopes that he will catch on. And then learning about food, because he has systemic lupus. He's very healthy. He's got a degree in kinesiology. So he's really big onto health. Yeah, he's really big into health. My daughter, the same thing. She's never been vaccinated, and she'll be 20 years old this year. And she too, finding credible resources, being a critical thinker, and researching ingredients in foods and vaccines. She just had a baby herself, and she did not vaccinate my granddaughter. So this is our second generation of not being vaccinated. So we're super happy about that. Mm-hmm. And then with my youngest son, it's the same thing. I'm teaching him to be a critical thinker. And it's important that I don't indoctrinate my children, and the media doesn't indoctrinate your children. Indoctrination is indoctrination. So I want my children to be critical thinkers. And when I tell them something, I want them to check my answer. Mm-hmm. Now, yes, I want them to know that they can trust what I'm saying, that I'm their mom, and they can always believe whatever it is that I'm saying, because I would never lie to my children, and they know that. Mm-hmm. But it's a learning curve. I still want them to research what I tell them, because that's super important to growing up into when they become their own parents, so that they can teach their children that as well.
Yeah. Let me ask you, you talk about critical thinking, and one of the things that comes to mind is the difference between a critical thinker and a cynic. And we've got millions of cynics out there on both sides, if you will, of the aisle, or from all different quarters of our population. Mm-hmm. How do you do that? Because I don't hear you being necessarily, you're critical, but you're not cynical about the CDC or the FDA. Now, by the way, just a side note here, the FDA has provided sufficient evidence not to trust them. And aspartame is just one of those, because in 1983, when I interviewed this nutritional expert on aspartame, back then they used to give you these boxes full of stuff. You'd get the promotional stuff, right? When I was working for the station. And it was filled with the cereals and the drinks and the this and the that and the other, right? And I took it home to my first wife and I, and we started consuming it. Didn't think anything of it, right? Well, she became very nauseous and so forth. I went into severe mood swings. And the only thing we could think of was the stuff we were eating. So we both stopped. And in about a week and a half to 2 weeks, those symptoms went away. I wanted to make sure that that's what it was. So I went back on some of the stuff for about a week, experienced the mood swings, haven't touched the stuff since. And I even asked the woman, I said in the interview, so you're telling me that all of the scientific studies have been done and this stuff called Equal is perfectly safe? To which, of course, she answered, yes. So not just a kind of a sidebar in terms of that. So the cynic versus the critic in terms of especially training up your children in the ways in which they should go so that when they get old, I know you know this passage, they will not depart from it.
Mm-hmm. So it's funny because I just posted something, 5 days ago, I posted something on Facebook, and it was a letter to my two sons. And the reason why I wrote this letter to them, because I feel like as men, men today are not getting the credit that they deserve. And I just want my children, who are my sons, to understand that their lives are just as important as anybody else's. And if you don't mind, this is what I had written to my sons. In what you were saying about being cynical versus being a critical thinker. So I wrote to my sons, Romans 12:12, do not be conformed to this world, but be transformed by the renewal of your mind, that by testing you may discern what is the will of God, what is good and acceptable and perfect. And then I wrote, the world cannot survive without you. Parts of society will generalize you. Remember, you are unique, and the only one to please is the one above. Parts of society will make radical claims to demonize you and lie to women to falsely empower them. Remember, you have different needs than a woman, and you are not an animal just because. Remember, the opposite sex cannot be empowered by tearing the other one down. Empowerment comes by uplifting one another and understanding that the desires of each are different. Parts of society will use these tactics to distort the relationship between a man and a woman. They will further use these to abolish the family. This method is used to create division and to keep you at war with the opposite sex, so the nuclear family will no longer exist. This method is also used to gain control of your children for generations to come, for this has already begun. But I am here as a woman and as your mother to give you the proper warning and training you'll need, as you cannot do this alone. I have not raised you to treat women like queens. I have not only raised you to treat women like queens, but remember, your queen shall treat you like the king you are, and together you shall study the word of God and shall remember and shall remain consistent with your faith. If you do this, you will persevere through it all and see the beauty in all that God has in store for you. Follow Christ, not the trajectories of society, and negativity will not consume your days. As men, you will love your family, and they will need your strength, your wisdom, and your backbone to lead them on the righteous path. Love, Mom and Mommy.
That's beautiful. Give me a quick synopsis of your inner life.
My inner life?
Your inner life.
Wow, that is a really deep question.
We try here on Tell Me Your Story.
You know, well, I just gave you a part of it. I think I tend to overthink things, and I think that I used to think that was one of my weaknesses, and now moving forward, I know that that is one of my strengths, because I do have the tendency to overthink things. That's what leads me to research everything. My love for my children is solid, it's real. And, I often ask myself, like, if I die, like, what would I want to be remembered by, And before, it's like, you think about your successes of being of some sort of financial gain. or they tell you that the more money you make, the more people you can help. To me, that's false information. You don't have to make a lot of money to make an impact in this world.
Mm-hmm.
And if you're a mother and if you're a father, your initial impact starts with your children. And I know that when I die and something happens to me, they are my greatest accomplishments. They are my seeds. And, you know, I might be getting a little bit too, but I don't know, family, God, and my children, and hoping that this story that I'm sharing about my son, and I Am Not Contagious, is really going to not only help holistic children, because this is obviously going to create a positive self-perception in holistic children, because I think every children needs a story that they can relate to. But this is also a story for those who are not from holistic homes, because at the end of the day, this story is about unification. And it's just about putting our differences aside for the sake of our children, so that we can put ourselves in each other's shoes and have compassion for one another.
Yeah. I have to say that I had what I would consider to be not a great day the other day, and in conversations with people. I'm not sure it was because I was, quote unquote, off my meds or, or what the deal was, but I made a rather disparaging observation. Here in California, we're going through what I consider to be these silly recall elections of public officials. And they say that the cost, they're complaining about the monies that were spent by this particular public official, in the millions of dollars. And the cost for example, this particular recall is going to be, and I'm going to put it in this context, $250 million, $255 million. And yet they're complaining about the wasteful spending of this particular public official. And I'm sitting here going, the guy's got a year and a half left in his term. Let him go through his term and be done with it, and then put somebody else in there. Don't waste $255 million of tax dollars that I put in there, And then I added to that, I said, and if this guy's name was something else and he was of the other party, you wouldn't be blinking an eye. You'd say, oh, what a great job he's doing. Plus the fact how many other of these same public officials in other states basically did the same thing, but they're not being recalled, and they say they have like 13 or 15 different issues with this particular public official. And I'm just sitting here going, we have got to get beyond this. This is insanity. That's why we try to bring out new ways of living, because the old ways don't work. This process, and I'm not saying getting rid of voting. Please don't misconstrue that. What I'm saying is that we've got some serious issues that we need to address, and we need to find some new ways of addressing them. And the only way, this is what's interesting when what you're bringing up here, especially when it comes to not just vaccines, but nutrition. Okay. When I was a kid growing up in school, they talked about, even back in the 70s, about the dumbing down of the educational system. And do you know what I thought? You talk about, by a renewing of the mind, and let us come together, let us reason together. And of course, we use the brain to reason, right? Mm-hmm. And I thought, wait a minute. Okay, if the system is being dumbed down, the people that are going to graduate are going to go on, and it was already starting, accused of being dumbed down even then, back in the 70s. Thinking, okay, so those people are going to go out and they're going to work for some of these textbook writers, and they're going to write the new textbooks from the perspective of the dumbed down education that they got. And then they're going to put that into the school system, which is still being dumbed down. And then the next generation and the next generation and the next generation, until eventually all you'll have essentially will be picture books that really will just be pictures of colors. That's all. There'll be nothing left, because, and so it's like, and it's the same thing with, for example, the economy. When I started thinking about going to work for the first time, and, my father worked for a company for 25, 30 years. And back then, of course, you stay at a company for a long time, and hopefully each year or two, you get a little bump up, right? Well, how do they pay for the bump up? They charge a little more for the product or service, right? All right. So then the next few years, you want to let another bump up. And the same cycle happens. So then the price of your product or service keeps going up, and of course the buying power that you have decreases. So you need another bump up, and it goes on and on and on. That's not sustainable. You can't keep that going. It's not possible to continue to. I mean, I've been pretty much at the same rate for 15 years now. 15 years now. I'm not wealthy by any means. I don't have a bunch of other side things going on. I get some support from our listeners through this program, which is greatly appreciated. Don't get me wrong. But I think it goes back to what you said before, that our success, our lineage, if you will, is not tied to how much we earn. It's what we do with what we have, what we've been given, right?
Mm-hmm.
And that's the bottom line. And what you've been given is an opportunity to share this book, I Am Not Contagious, about your son and his experience. I mean, I could write my own book, because I grew up legally blind. And, it wasn't until my 36th year that I received a lens implant. Now I'm driving a truck, go figure.
Yeah.
Because at one point I'd given up. I'd said, you know what, forget it.
Yeah. I think that there's, again, education, we've been lied to about what education really is.
Yes.
And I've been asked several times, because your son can no longer go to school because he's actually banned from attending any private or public school. Like, I can't even send him to a Montessori school because of how they file their business. If you file your business with the state controls what you do. If you don't file your business under a PMA, or if you don't file your school under a PEA, the state will continue to own everything and every move that you make. So that is another thing that I would encourage people to start looking into. If you don't want the state to intervene and the state to regulate you, look at a PMA, which is a private member association, and then look at a PEA, which is a private education association. So the answer is no. I would not send my kid back to school. Again, I live here in New York, and what's happening with our education system today is very, very sad and disgusting. With the sex education and critical race theory and everything. And that's another topic for another show.
Yeah. And there's so many subjects that we could dive into, and we won't obviously have time for it today. But I am grateful to you for the work that you are doing, and for the process that you have created to help your children. And it does seem to me that you have actually been able to transcend that aspect of what I brought up earlier in the program. The difference between what I quoted from the preamble, and I was actually rather amazed that I remembered it all, and the First Amendment to the Constitution, and the whole business of individualism. We're either going to survive as a community or we're not. But by the same token, I also agree with you from the standpoint of, I'm hearing, I don't know, you probably do follow the news media to some degree, and you hear a lot of the stories coming out about China, for example. And I hear all these criticisms about what China is doing on all kinds of different levels. And I do have to tell you that when I hear these criticisms of China, I'm going, God, that sounds an awful lot like America.
Mm-hmm.
And it's like, we need to fix our own house. We need to take care of our own house, and I don't know. I'm an idealist. Forgive me. I'm an optimist and I'm an idealist.
Right.
And I honestly believe, as an optimist, that we do have a future that is going to be better. But the only way it's going to be better is if we start to try to work together in some fashion to address some of these issues from a logical standpoint. And again, I'll quote that passage from the Old Testament: let us sit down and reason together. How do you do that? With the God-given brain that we were given. And I thank you for using yours as well as your heart, because you give if I may put it this way, you give a damn about your kids.
Mhm. Yeah.
And I thank you for sharing that with us here on the program.
Thank you.
I just want to let our listeners know the website, AngelaPearson.com, AngelaPearson.com. We will be linked to your website as well so that people can get in touch with you and get more information from you about not only the book, but the work that you're doing. You've got an extensive education in a lot of these different areas, as well as the education that you've given yourself through this process. And we thank you for doing that. I do have 3 final questions that I do want to ask you, that I ask all of my guests. You may have addressed them throughout the program, sometime during the program, but I like to ask them directly. Before I do that, though, I need to address my listeners and viewers and let you know that we're here Sundays at 7 a.m. and 7 p.m., Monday mornings at 1 a.m. and a special edition of Tell Me Your Story, 9 a.m. Wednesdays here on this fine station. We have podcasts at SoundCloud, iTunes, TuneIn Radio, Spotify, Stitcher, Player FM, Blueberry, iHeartRadio, Amazon Music, and many other locations. We hope that you will listen. We also hope that you'll go to YouTube, to the Tell Me Your Story channel, and not only watch the videos, but also subscribe. I'm grateful to those who have. I'm up to a whopping 29 subscribers, Angela. I'm so excited that I've got 20 people, 29 people.
Somewhere.
And I'm near 39,000 listens on SoundCloud. I'm very excited about that as well. Also, a reminder to participate in the Decade of Perfect Vision, the 2020s. Spend that time going within. Listen to that still small voice. That's what it's there for. Follow the promptings. I guarantee you, never, ever will it put you in harm's way. Might challenge you. It's challenged me to do things that my mind, my ego-centered mind, has said, no, I can't do that. But then when I do follow through, it's like, oh, it's much better than it would have been. Okay, I better start trusting more, being more trusting of that still small voice. And also, if you'd like to support this program, we'd greatly appreciate it. That's why we have a PayPal and Patreon account for your security as well. We'll take energetic support as well. On to my final 3 questions, wrapping things up here with you. And this is the author, of course, of I Am Not Contagious, about her son. First question is, who is Angela Pearson?
I am a daughter of God and a mother of 3 who, and a friend to all in short.
What is it that you hope to or want to achieve through the work that you're doing now?
I'm really just hoping to achieve unification for the sake of my son. And just some compassion. I think that we're lacking in that department where, because we're being fed only one narrative, that vaccines are safe and effective, and that if you're not vaccinated, you're a disease to society. And that's just false. That's not true. And so I'm really hoping that we gain some compassion and unification.
And finally, what is your life's purpose?
My life's purpose is to amplify my children's voice and to make sure that I am doing everything in my power to make sure that they succeed in life.
Angela Pearson, thank you again for sharing with us and being a part of this program. And, as I said before, we put out a table, a smorgasbord of all kinds of different ideas. We just ask people to come to the table and take what resonates, what tastes good to them. I hope that they'll come back after they've tried something and check out something more. Consider the possibilities. That's what it's all about. And listen honestly and genuinely and openly to what is being presented, whether initially you agree or disagree, because you may find some real interesting jewels in the conversation. And again, we thank you for bringing some of those jewels to our program today.
Thank you.
I'm Richard Dugan, and I thank you for listening and watching Tell Me Your Story, New Paradigms for a New World. May we inoculate you with some good things. I hope that you will. And until our next live broadcast, podcast, videocast, love, talal.